discretion advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
August 14th, the summer of 2022. A couple just at the start of their journey into adulthood headed out for a day of hiking in the Talladega National Forest in Alabama. It was a Sunday. The sun was shining and school started that Monday. The only thing left to do was squeeze in one last trip out to see the waterfalls before these two young people had their very first classes of the semester at the University of Central Florida the following day. 22-year-old Adam Simji and Michaela Paulus, who was only 20 years old at the time, had been out to the park many times before that fateful Sunday. In fact, the forests in the national park were some of Adam's favorite places to go, especially when he could go there when the weather was good and he had his girlfriend Michaela by his side. The young couple set out pretty early that morning and were already driving around the park around 10 o'clock when they spotted something on the side of the road that made them pull over and stop the car. A young woman had flagged them down. Right beside her was a broken-down vehicle of her own that she needed help with. 21-year-old Yasmin Hyder was camping up in the woods with her friend and was on her way into town to pick up some much-needed food and supplies when her friend's car had suddenly stopped working. Yasmin was then left stranded on the road, and that's why she'd stopped Adam and Michaela to ask her for help. Adam did not hesitate. He jumped right in. Both he and Michaela spent over an hour with Yasmin on the side of the park road, desperately trying to fix her car. They even called some of their relatives for advice on what to do, and they still couldn't get Yasmin's car running. They even offered to go and get her help at the closest ranger station. That was how much both Adam and Michaela wanted to help Yasmin, and that was why Yasmin's sudden shift in demeanor caught them so off guard. After all of that time and effort the two of them had just put into trying to help her, Yasmin pulled out a gun she'd been hiding from them this whole time and started barking out orders. In another surprising and chilling twist in this case, she then filmed herself marching Adam and Michaela into the forests that surrounded the park road. Now concealed from any potential witnesses that may drive by, Yasmin demanded Adam and Michaela's banking information, still recording herself in what would turn out to be a horrifying and grisly archive of someone's final moments. The video shows her giving one last order to the couple as she marched them into the woods, and that was for them to drop their phones. It was after this that all hell broke loose. In another unexpected twist of the case, while Adam dropped his phone onto the forest floor that day, he pulled out his own surprise for Yasmin, a 9mm gun that he'd been hiding himself. Adam then ordered Yasmin to put down her weapon, and a fragile stalemate ensued. "Are you serious?" Yasmin asks on the recording, but then she pulled the trigger before anyone could respond. Her gun jammed, and while she was rushing to get it working again, Adam threw himself in the line of fire to protect Michaela. He shot at Yasmin, but by then Yasmin had a working weapon as well. It was only 11:30 Sunday morning when the nearby ranger station that Adam and Michaela had just offered to get Yasmin help from received a call reporting a shootout in the forest. While their ranger teams began the long drive up into the mountain to reach the chaotic scene, Yasmin and Adam were just about done exchanging blows. Yasmin had been shot several times in the chest. Adam had been shot only once, but by another twist of fate, he'd come out on the bottom. "Why did you shoot?" Yasmin says on her own recording. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." As Adam and Yasmin laid bleeding out in the middle of the forest, two witnesses were left standing. One was the terrified 20-year-old Michaela, and the other, a 37-year-old woman who'd only tangled the thread of the story even further. Crystal Diane Pinkins had also been on the side of the road that day and a witness to the shootout that went down between Adam and Yasmin, but she was also tied to the case in many more ways than that. Not only was she the owner of the car that Yasmin had been trying to get Adam and Michaela to fix, but she was also the friend who'd set up camp with Yasmin somewhere out in the park. Adam was fighting to save Michaela and his own life. Michaela spotted Crystal hiding in the trees and pleaded with her to go and get help. Crystal, either terrified herself or torn between helping her friend and the absolute insanity that their attempted robbery had descended into, turned tail and ran. Realizing that Crystal wasn't going to help them, Michaela then changed tracks, and as the shots died out, she made a run for her phone and called the emergency services. Now knowing that help was finally on the way, Michaela rushed back to Adam, who was lying not far from where Yasmin was. Both shooters were incapacitated by then, but Adam was in really bad shape. Michaela then desperately began performing CPR to try to keep her boyfriend alive until paramedics could get there. But because of how far they were out into the park that day, it took first responders a very long half an hour to reach the site. When they got there, they walked onto the scene where Michaela was still performing CPR on Adam, but Adam was gone. Beside them, his killer still laid bleeding out and alive and awake enough to start making demands all over again. As paramedics began addressing the gunshot wounds on her chest, Yasmin kept asking how much trouble she was in. Quote, "I know I'm going to get time for this," she said. "I just want to know how much." While Yasmin was first taken by ambulance and then airlifted to the hospital, investigators at the scene had to now interview the very distraught Michaela. Still reeling from her shock and grief, Michaela managed to give an account of what happened and a description of the woman she'd seen disappear back into the forest during the shootout. Piecing together the bits of information that Yasmin had drip-fed the couple as they tried to fix her car that morning, the investigators determined that there was a camp nearby where a known number of people were living off-grid. These people were more than likely armed, and, if Yasmin was anything to go by, dangerous. Teams of investigators and rangers scoured the area and even brought in sniffer dogs to locate this camp and anyone else who could be involved in Adam Simji's murder. Only about half a mile away, those teams found what they were looking for: an armed camp and the scene of another potential shootout. They managed to catch the woman standing outside of a tent on her own off guard, but as the police were shouting for her to lie down on the ground, another person approached the scene wielding a shotgun. What followed was an incredibly tense stalemate, one where the police found themselves facing a loaded weapon and not wanting to be the first ones to shoot. This case made another unforeseen and unbelievable twist yet again when Crystal's son approached the camp with that loaded shotgun in his hands, and yet another twist when officers realized that Crystal's son was only 5 years old. The police asked the child to put the gun down, but the boy could see his mother lying on the ground outside the tent that the three of them had been all living in, and he was afraid. Probably not knowing what else to do, the boy started slowly stepping over to his mother, but he was still holding on to the shotgun. Everything could devolve again in a split second, and someone else could potentially end up dead if the police didn't get this situation under control quickly. Everyone had to watch and wait to see what the boy would do. No one there wanted to be the reason why this case would erupt into another shootout, especially when it involved a 5-year-old child. The boy inched over to his mother, and eventually he did put the gun down. He was just a kid, and he was scared by all the people suddenly turning up at their camp, and at the end of things, he just wanted his mother. In front of all of those armed officers, he made his way over to Crystal, put the gun down, and then got down on the ground so he could lie beside his mother. Now that he was finally unarmed, the police then secured the scene and arrested Crystal. Her son was immediately taken into care, and she was sent to jail for her part in the murder that had occurred only a half-mile away from that campsite. Yasmin later argued that she'd only approached Adam and Michaela because she genuinely needed to get into town to get food, and their car was broken. She said that the situation had just escalated so quickly, and she would have been happy enough to get a ride into town instead of the whole thing turning into a shootout that had left Adam dead. But Michaela disagreed. In response to Yasmin's statement, Michaela argued that she and Adam would have been more than happy to have dropped Yasmin into town themselves if she had asked them to, and that Yasmin was responsible for Michaela losing the love of her life. In a later social media post, Michaela wrote, quote, "My reason for being, my soulmate, my life partner, the future father of my children, died in the middle of a state park in Alabama. No words can begin to describe the shock and pain I'm in. Adam is the best person I've ever met on the face of this entire planet. He was the most pure soul, and he made sure I knew I would be safe when I was with him. It comforts me to say he passed in one of his favorite places, the forest in the mountains. No other scenario could match this pain. I wish I could hold your hand one last time." Both Yasmin and Crystal pled guilty in federal court. Yasmin was found guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery, and received 35 years in prison. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and I really appreciate you listening. If you're new to 10-Minute Murder, welcome. Make yourself comfortable, settle in here, and go back and catch up on all of the back episodes. It makes it easier to do that if you subscribe wherever you're listening right now. And when you do become a subscriber, you'll also see the episodes, the new ones, as soon as they come out. They'll automatically come to you. If you have social media, connect with 10-Minute Murder there, any place that's possible. You can go to the search bar in any of the social media places like Facebook, Instagram. Just type in 10-Minute Murder, and it's going to pop right up. If you're looking for more information or links to any of that, you can go to 10minutemurder.com. And coming up on the next episode of 10-Minute Murder, we're going to talk about a case all of these cases are disturbing, but the ones that particularly get to me are the ones that involve kids. And the one coming up next is about Danielle Van Dam, who was kidnapped and murdered by a neighbor. Now, the story's interesting because the father thought that the little girl was asleep in the bed. They had a security system, an alarm system, and it did go off, but he just still assumed that she was asleep in the bed. It went off twice, and when they woke up the next morning and saw that she wasn't there, they were like, "Oh, the security alarm. We should have checked the bed." But that's a story you're going to hear about next on 10-Minute Murder. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.